A bank robbery was described as the heist of the century. Ingenious plan of a mastermind to crack an impregnable vault makes the detectives out of their minds. The events of today's story took place in a French bank named Société Générale, one of France's most well-known banks with branches all over the world. The bank is in the city of Nice, which is located on the French Riviera, the southeastern coast of France on the Mediterranean Sea. At that time, most people used to save their valuable property in this bank, such as money, jewelry, gold, and so on. The bank accepted all sorts of deposits and placed them in safe boxes inside the vault. The customers were so confident that their properties were safe since the bank had one of the biggest and strongest vault in all France. However, what happened on Monday, 19th of July in 1976, is something that has never happened before. The day started like every other day. All the officers took their seats to start a typical day. There was nothing strange that indicated that something unusual was about to occur. Everything was fine until the bank's director and a few officers tried to open the vault to release funds for customer transactions. The vault main door opened normally, but the inner door remained persistent, and they were unable to open it. They remained calm since it is not the first time. The door had been stuck before. It is a 75-year-old steel door that weighed more than 20 tons, so dealing with such problems was common. But the problem was that many of the customers were gathered in front of the bank, waiting for the officers to open the door so that they could make their transactions. The bank director called the vault manufacturer company, which is also in charge of maintaining it. A few minutes later, a representative of the company arrived to work on the lock mechanism and went on the unlocking procedure again and again, trying to figure out why the door is stuck. After a while, the expert discovered that the lock worked fine. Nevertheless, the door remained stuck, and no marks showed that the door had been forced. The expert brought all the tools and continued on trying to discover what made the door stuck. But at the same time, frustrated customers started to crowd around the bank with increasing impatience. They began to worry. They wanted their money. They wanted to get to their values, and nobody was telling them why they had to wait. Anxiety was all around. The expert attempts on solving the riddle of the mechanism had no clue. Despite the assistance of additional personnel sent by the manufacturer company, they couldn't even find out what was going on. It seemed confusing and complicated. They had no explanation unless the door was closed from the other side, which is impossible. How could a door be closed from inside if it is the only way in and out the vault? That was insane. By noon, a decision was made to break through the side of the vault door. They wanted to figure out what made the door stuck. By 3:00 p.m., a small hole at last opened up in which they can peer inside the vault. The workmen declared what to be seen as impossible. The bank had been robbed. The bank director called the police. Within a few minutes, the bank swarmed with cops, including every important policeman in Nice, as they were aware that they were going to conduct an investigation into one of the biggest bank robberies in history. They made the hole bigger. All these cops came in. The bank robbers took all the money that was inside in addition to other 4,000 safe boxes of valuable things. And there was a quote written on the wall with a big font that says, "Without weapons, without violence, and without hate." The question raised here is how the robbers got in and out the vault. That was so obvious for the detectives that were there. There was a hole opened up to a tunnel that led to the city's underground sewer system, and the equipment used by the robbers to break into the vault was left there. Everything was left behind shows that this was a big operation. There were 27 gas cylinders that had been used to fuel blowtorches, and there was ventilation equipment that bring fresh air into the tunnel, plus almost half-mile of electrical cable. They must have planned this massive operation for months in advance, which is worth the award that they have taken at the end. Burglars had stolen money, jewelry, and precious metals worth about $10 million. It was the biggest bank robbery in world history and was described as the heist of the century, and most international media used that as their headline. The bank offered a $250,000 reward for anyone who got information leading to the arrest of the thieves. It was not only the biggest bank robbery, but the biggest investigation too. High-ranking detectives had been brought from all over France, and they began interviewing thousands of people, bank employees, customers that they had boxes in the vault. Even workmen and people who were living around the bank had been interviewed too. And there were evidences proved that a well-known big gang called the Sewer Rats were accomplice in this robbery. It is a gang that used sewer system in most their crimes. After a long period of investigation, the detectives found suspects, and they were almost sure that they are members of the Sewer Rats, but they felt that none of the suspects up to this point had the ability to plan this operation, so they made the decision to keep them under constant surveillance because they were chasing the mastermind, the one who put together this operation. A hint on the robbers came on the first days of October, when two men who were under surveillance went to a local bank and tried to sell gold ingots. The bank employee tracked the ingot serial and saw they matched those stolen from the bank. The bank staff alerted the police, and the two men were immediately taken into custody. The authorities had solid proof that those men belonged to the gang and would become more proximate to other members if they were pushed into speaking and confessing to the identity of the operation's mastermind. The police in France were informed that they may accuse their relatives of crimes that they aren't even aware of, and that they had the authority to hold any suspect in prison and use any method to compel a confession, even if it's illegal. After all this, a name came out. One of the two men gave the police a name of a photographer called Albert. He said that he is the one who planned for this operation. The police went immediately to the photographer and told him all what they got. The man was so shocked. He told them that he knew nothing about that, and the cops felt despair because he did not fit the profile either. And he certainly sounded innocent, and when they asked about him, many people claimed that he lived a simple life as a photographer, and they knew him as a charming romantic who was, above all, loyal, especially to his wife. The couple preferred living in the countryside far away from city's noise. So a simple man like him planned for a bank robbery seemed weird to the cops. But he had been taken into custody though. Detectives started over-investigating him, and the man kept claiming that he is innocent. The investigation had lasted for hours and hours. The cops tried all the tricks they know to get a confession, the legal and the illegal ones, but the photographer remained calm. While Albert was being interviewed, the police raided the cottage that he shared with his wife. Illegal weapons and bombs were found, which gave the police the upper hand in the interrogation. As we said before, the police had no problem using illegal ways to get the confession they want. They have threatened him that they will accuse his wife for the possession of firearms and put her in prison for many years because they are pretty sure that Albert loves his wife so much and he won't let them arrest her. At this moment, Albert was forced to reveal the truth to the police in order to save her wife. He confessed that he was the mastermind of this operation and gave them a well-detailed speech on how he planned for it. He said that the idea came to his mind 2 years ago when one of his neighbors who was working at the bank told him that the vault had no alarm system. Albert went to the bank and rented a safe box. The bank used to give the safe box holders the right to enter the vault without guards in order to give them some kind of privacy. While putting their stuff in their boxes, he entered the vault with his camera and started photographing each corner of the vault and made extensive notes. Thousands of safe boxes were inside the vault, so he needed a plan that allows him to stay for a long time inside without being noticed so that he could break all or most of the locks. He thought again and again, and he realized that the best option he got to get into the vault is through the underground sewer system. Nice City has a huge underground sewer system, but it wasn't under the buildings, so Albert thought that he may dig a tunnel from the closest point to get under the bank building. Of course, this is hard to achieve. It took a lot of effort and search. He decided to go under the sewer system for weeks trying to find a line that led directly to the bank and to figure out the appropriate digging starting point. This was way too difficult. The sewer system was too musty that he couldn't bear the smell. He smoked a Cuban cigar to combat the odor. He finally realized that this was an impossible mission. Pretending to be a contractor, he went to the city hall and get a map of the city's sewer system, which made things much easier for him. Finally, he found the closest sewer branch to the bank. He spotted the right digging starting point. From the closest point to the vault, a 30-foot tunnel should be dug. It is not a big distance, right? But what made it difficult is that the digging was under one of the biggest avenues known by the traffic jam, and it's going to be heard from the street above. Albert now had the plan, but not the means nor the men to achieve it. So he traveled to Marseille and met with some gang's leaders, including the Sewer Rats gang. They really loved the plan and got excited for it. They agreed to help him in return for a big cut of the cake. They'd provide him with manpower and all the equipment required to start the operation. Firstly, Albert placed a group of guys on the digging zone with radios to notify the others if cops appeared unexpectedly. He took all the precautions to ensure that the operation wouldn't fail. The digging itself was so exhausting because they were working with traditional equipment so as not to be heard by others. In addition, the space was tight, hot, and poorly ventilated, which was very difficult for the diggers. One day, one of the men couldn't persist such conditions and passed out, and here, Albert found himself obliged to divide them into teams. Each team would work for 10 minutes, then rest for another 10. Even a doctor was available for emergencies. They needed fresh air and light to keep working, so they brought ventilation tube and half-mile electrical cable, and they took electricity from a nearby garage to run ventilators and light. This made the working conditions better. Albert believed that the plan's success depends on workers' comfort, so he did his best to make them at ease. 9 weeks later, on the first days of July, they finally reached the vault's wall. Everyone was happy but Albert. He knew that a lot of hard work was yet to do. They still had to break through a 12-inch reinforced concrete wall. This wasn't difficult, but they needed jackhammers and drills to break through. Albert was afraid that digging with such equipment could be heard, so he went above the digging zone and asked them to start digging. His fears proved groundless. He completely couldn't hear nothing. They were able to break halfway through the vault wall that night and decided to continue the rest of the wall the night they entered the vault. The D-Day had come, Saturday 17th of July. They chose that day because it's the first day of weekend and the bank would be empty and they would have enough time to complete what they had started. That night, they got into the tunnel and start digging what left from the concrete wall. They still had 6 inches of reinforced concrete to break through. The drilling took far longer than Albert had planned. It was 2:00 a.m. Sunday morning when the rats finally entered the vault. Welding the steel door to its frame was their first task. This way, Albert and his gang would have time to escape if someone attempted to access the vault space. Then, they started breaking the safe boxes one by one, and they were astonished by what they found. Jewelry, gold, money, everything they dreamed about. They celebrated their win by having dinner inside the vault, like kings on gold-plated found in one of the safe boxes. That night, armed couriers had come to make a night deposit. It's a usual operation. An armed van brought a suitcase full of money and throw it through a small hole that led directly to the vault without being opened. That was like a bonus, a gift from heaven for them. The sewer rats kept breaking the other safe boxes. They spent almost 27 hours inside the vault, though they were just able to open 400 boxes out of 4,000. But it was more than enough for them. Monday morning at 5:00 a.m., Albert stated that it was time to leave. Less than 4 hours later, the bank would open. But before leaving, Albert took a paint spray and wrote the famous quote on the wall, "Without weapons, without violence, without hate." This quote made the detectives was rage at the people who were laughing and applauding at the crime, who went around talking to each other, and instead of saying hello and goodbye, they would say without weapons, without violence, without hate. At the end, Albert was ultimately arrested alongside the rest of the sewer rat gang. Then he cited all the details that we have previously said to the detectives and expressed his desire to cooperate in return for keeping his wife away from all of this. Albert was in police's custody until a final judgment is issued against him. During this period, Albert, along with his lawyer, used to meet the judge every Thursday in his office. The judge wanted to evaluate his state and see to what extent he is ready to cooperate. This situation lasted for several weeks. Albert went to the judge's office and spent half an hour with him. He was very cooperative, and everyone expected that he would receive a reduced sentence. In the last meeting before his trial, Albert went to the judge's office as usual. He started talking about the robbery and gave the judge 3 pieces of paper with drawings of the mice sewers system, and began to explain what had happened, how he planned for the operation, and where they had started digging. But the judge seemed confused, and Albert offered his assistance. Taking advantage of the judge's confusion, Albert calmly got up from his place, stood behind the judge's chair, and began to explain to the judge more precisely. We started from here, and we did this, and that, and finally arrived there. The judge was focused on Albert's words while looking at the map. Then all of a sudden, he turned his body towards the window behind the judge's desk and jumped through it, and left the judge and lawyer in astonishment, unable to comprehend what had happened. The judge's office was on the first floor, making it easier for Albert to jump on the roof of a car that was parked under the window. As soon as he jumped, his friend was waiting for him on a motorcycle, and then ran away. Since that day, Albert had disappeared. The police couldn't find neither him nor the loot that was stolen, because he did not reveal any information that would lead them to it during the period of the investigation. However, they said that he sent $600 in cash to the owner of the car whose roof he landed on. Albert spent the rest of his life sending provocative photos and messages to investigators through the media, newspapers, and magazines. Sadly, his wife, whom he loved so much, decided not to share his life of escape. She remained in Nice, where she continued to work as a nurse. In the end, the mastermind of the century's biggest robbery passed away in 1989 from lung cancer. Here we come to the end of our story. If you like it, do not forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so that you can receive new videos.